The fluorescent lights in the empty conference room, presentation still on screen, hummed a low, insistent note, a sound I'd grown accustomed to, almost a companion in the silence. It was late, long past the hour, when the last of the project managers usually clicked off their own screens and vanished into the city's indifferent sprawl. The air, recycled and thin, carried the phantom scent of stale coffee and ambition, both of which felt equally distant to me now. I sat at the head of the polished table, a single, forgotten mug of lukewarm water beside my hand, the condensation long evaporated. The projector cast a harsh, unwavering rectangle of light onto the far wall, displaying a pie chart that detailed quarterly projections. Red, green, and blue segments, a vibrant mosaic of numbers that meant absolutely nothing to me. Not anymore. I watched the dust motes dance in the beam, tiny, insignificant specks of gray, floating adrift. It felt like looking into a mirror. My own reflection, faint and distorted, shimmered in the glossy tabletop. A stranger's face, etched with something like exhaustion, something like resignation. The grief, a dull, persistent ache behind my ribs, had a way of hollowing things out, leaving only the shell. My parents gone, my sister, a memory that still burned. The world had kept turning, oblivious, and I had simply stopped, drifting, like the dust. A sudden, sharp rap on the glass panel of the conference room door jolted me. My hand twitched, nearly knocking over the mug. I hadn't heard anyone approach. My head snapped up. He was a man of precise movements and even more precise language, the kind of professional who never wasted a word. He held a thick manila envelope in one hand, the flaps slightly unsealed. His gaze, even through the tinted glass, felt like a physical weight. He pushed the door open, the sound a low sigh in the quiet room, and stepped inside. The air seemed to thicken, losing its stale neutrality, taking on a subtle, earthy scent like old paper and something else, something metallic. He didn't smile. He rarely did. "Seth," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of any warmth. He didn't wait for a reply, simply walked to the table, his footsteps unnervingly soft. He placed the envelope directly in front of me, aligning it with the edge of the table with meticulous care. An ancestral home. It seems I am the sole inheritor. My brow furrowed. I hadn't known of any ancestral home. My parents had always spoken of their humble beginnings, their self-made success. No grand family estates, no hidden legacies. Just a small, comfortable suburban house, now empty, echoing. Inheritor. I managed, my voice rough, unused. Of what? He pushed the envelope closer, a silent command to open it. A rather substantial estate, though remote. Untouched, it would seem, for generations. My great-grandmother's line, specifically. A branch of the family that, for reasons undisclosed, was kept entirely separate. My fingers fumbled with the clasp, the metal cool against my skin. Inside, nestled among official-looking documents, was a photograph. An old, sepia-toned image, slightly faded, creased at the corners. It depicted a house. Not a home, but a house. Gables jutted at odd angles, windows like vacant eyes stared out from beneath heavy brows of overgrown ivy. The roof sagged in places, a testament to years of neglect, and a massive oak, ancient and gnarled, clawed at one side, its branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the heavens. It was magnificent in its decay, a monument to forgotten time. And it was mine. Remote, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. How remote? Very, the solicitor confirmed, his gaze unwavering. Deep in the woods, on the edge of the old Blackwood mire, generations since anyone resided there, legally speaking. The deeds, the wills, they've all been meticulously maintained, waiting for the right bloodline to claim it. He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. And now, that bloodline is I. A strange prickle ran down my spine. It wasn't the thrill of sudden wealth, not even the shock of a forgotten lineage. It was something else, reaching for me. Why me? I asked, the question escaping before I could catch it. Why now? The solicitor merely inclined his head, a gesture that offered no answers. The timing of these things is rarely within our control, Seth. The will was discovered during the liquidation of an associated trust, a trust that had lain dormant for decades. He stood, his chair scraping faintly on the floor. The keys, the formal documentation, they're all within the envelope. A car has been arranged for tomorrow morning should I choose to survey the property. A driver will take I, and an agent will meet I there to assist with initial access. He turned, already halfway to the door. Think of it as a fresh start, perhaps. The metallic scent, I realized, was still lingering, or perhaps it was just the smell of the old photograph. It seemed to be waiting. What had it been waiting for all these years, deep in the forgotten woods? And what, precisely, was waiting inside? The door clicked shut behind the solicitor, leaving me once again in the humming silence of the empty conference room, the presentation still on screen. The pie chart, a glowing green against the projector's blue light, seemed to mark my newfound inheritance, a visual representation of the percentage of my life that had just irrevocably shifted course. Or perhaps it was just the smell of the old photograph I now held, its edges softened by time and handling. I looked down at the image of the house, a sprawling, Gothic shadow against a perpetually overcast sky, and felt a strange tug. A pull towards something I'd never known, a destiny whispered to me by a distant relative I couldn't even recall. A fresh start, I told myself. A chance to escape the suffocating quiet of my own apartment, the ghosts of recent losses that clung to the furniture like dust motes. This house, remote and forgotten, felt like an answer. An extreme answer, perhaps, but I was tired of half measures. I needed a complete uprooting, a seismic shift to jar me out of the dull ache that had become my constant companion. The drive north was long, the landscape gradually shedding its urban sprawl for vast stretches of pine forest and rolling, empty fields. The sky, a bruised purple-gray, mirrored my mood, but there was a flicker of anticipation, too. A determination to make this work, to carve out a new life in a place that had no memories of me, no expectations. My phone had lost signal miles back. I was truly alone, heading into the unknown. Then through a sudden break in the trees, I saw it. The gates, twin sentinels of wrought iron, rusted to a deep, angry orange, stood half open, their ornate scrollwork almost swallowed by thorny vines. The house, it loomed against the horizon, even larger than in the photograph, a monstrous silhouette of turrets and gables and countless vacant eyes. My chest tightened, a knot of unease coiling beneath my ribs. It wasn't just old, it was ancient, breathing decay. I parked the car near the gates, the tires crunching on loose gravel. A profound silence descended, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. I stepped out, the cold air immediately seeping into my jacket. Just the house, waiting. The driveway was a ruin, cracked flagstones emerging sporadically from a carpet of weeds. The house grew larger with every step, its scale becoming overwhelming. It wasn't just big, it was sprawling, a complex labyrinth of wings and extensions that seemed to have been added piecemeal over centuries, each section settling into its own unique slump. The stone facade was discolored, streaked with black grime and green moss, like tears on an old face. Others were boarded up, blindfolded secrets. Reaching the massive oak front door, I hesitated. It was at least 10 feet tall, studded with iron bosses, and looked as if it hadn't been opened in decades. The wood was warped, splintered in places, and the iron knocker, a grotesque gargoyle head, was encrusted with rust. I took a deep breath, the metallic tang from the conference room photograph, a sudden, unexpected ghost in my nostrils. It was just the smell of old iron, I told myself, a trick of memory. I pushed the door. It groaned, a deep, resonant sigh that vibrated through the very ground beneath my feet but didn't budge. I pushed harder, leaning my full weight into it. It was overwhelming, pressing in on me. I fumbled for my phone, its weak beam cutting a narrow path through the gloom. Cobwebs, thick and heavy, hung like tattered curtains from every surface. I moved deeper, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't just a house, it was a mausoleum. I passed through a series of drawing rooms, each larger and more decayed than the last. Furniture, draped in white sheets, stood like ghostly figures, their forms distorted and unsettling in the dim light. In one room, a grand piano sat silent, its keys yellowed and chipped, as if a spectral hand had been interrupted mid-symphony. A faint, almost imperceptible thump came from somewhere above me, a sound like a heavy book falling. I froze, my heart giving a sudden, anxious lurch. The sound didn't repeat, Just the house settling, I reasoned, the old timbers groaning under their own weight. I continued, my initial determination giving way to a creeping unease. The house was a maze. Every corridor seemed to lead to another, every room more desolate than the last. I found a library, its shelves still lined with thousands of leather-bound books, their pages brittle with age. I hugged myself, rubbing my bare forearms. It was just the draft, I told myself, a broken window somewhere. A shiver ran down my spine, unrelated to the temperature. I turned to leave the library, my gaze sweeping over the vast collection, and then I saw it. I was certain it hadn't been like that a moment ago. I hadn't touched anything. Had I? My memory felt hazy, the details of the room blurring at the edges. I stood there, staring at the misplaced book, my mind racing. Had the house always been like this, or was I already seeing things? The pie chart, a glowing green against the projector's blue light, seemed to mark my newfound inheritance, a visual representation of the percentages. 85%, my share. An entire life, a history I'd never known, distilled into a single vibrant slice on a digital display. I stood there for a long moment, the quiet pressing in, the air conditioning a distant murmur, a constant, low thrum that had been easy to ignore when the room was full, but now felt like a buzzing behind my eyes. I finally reached forward, my fingers finding the cold plastic of the remote. The residual light from the city outside the window felt thin, diluted, unable to truly penetrate the sudden gloom. I gathered my things, the weight of the thick folder in my hand hardly grounding. This house. It was real. A tangible thing, not just a distant dream or a half-forgotten ghost story from my childhood. I had to see it. I had to know. The drive out was long, the urban sprawl slowly giving way to winding country roads, then eventually to a narrow, overgrown lane that seemed to swallow the last vestiges of daylight. My headlights cut through the encroaching dusk, revealing skeletal trees and dense undergrowth that pressed in on either side. When I finally saw it, perched on a slight rise, silhouetted against a bruised sky, my breath hitched. The first few days were a blur of unpacking, cleaning, and the sheer, overwhelming quiet. I told myself it was just the age of the place, the settling timbers, the drafts finding their way through poorly sealed windows. My grief, too, was a constant companion, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my thoughts, ready to flare into an ache at the slightest provocation. It was a perfect storm, I reasoned, for an overactive imagination. Then I started seeing them, fleeting movements at the edge of my vision. I was in the dusty library, running my hand over the spines of forgotten books, the scent of aged paper and dry rot thick in the air. My head snapped up. Nothing, just the intricate carvings on the mantelpiece, the heavy velvet curtains stirred by a faint, imperceptible draft. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Tiredness, I decided. The journey, the unpacking, the emotional strain. It was catching up to me. Later that evening, as I tried to make sense of a stack of old ledgers in what must have been a study, a sound reached me. So faint, so delicate, it could have been the wind sighing through a crack in the window pane or the rustle of dry leaves against the glass. But it wasn't the wind. It was too soft, too close. A breath, perhaps. I froze, pen hovering over the yellowed page. I strained my ears, my muscles tensed. The house was silent again, utterly, profoundly silent. I shook my head, a small, involuntary shiver tracing its way down my spine. The old pipes. The house was a symphony of old house noises. Nothing more. Sometimes in the dead of night, when I lay awake in the cavernous bedroom, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside. But they always faded, leaving me alone with the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. The objects out of place started subtly. I found a heavy brass letter opener, which I distinctly remembered leaving on the desk in the study, sitting on the mantelpiece in the drawing room, a room I hadn't properly entered yet. Had I moved it? Was I so distracted, so lost in my own thoughts that I'd absent-mindedly carried it across the house? It seemed unlikely. I was meticulous, especially with things. But then I was also grieving, my mind a foggy landscape of loss. I picked it up, feeling the unexpected weight of it, and carried it back, placing it precisely where I remembered it being. The next morning, my reading glasses, which I'd left on the bedside table, were on the floor, several feet away, nestled against the leg of a heavy antique dresser. They hadn't fallen. They were too far. I knelt, picking them up, my fingers tracing the cold metal. My breath hitched. This wasn't absent-mindedness. This wasn't me. A prickle of unease spread across my skin. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. A draft, a vibration from a passing truck on the distant road. But there were no trucks, only the quiet. I told myself it was the house. An old house, settling, shifting. It made noises. It had drafts. Objects could fall. It was just unfamiliarity, magnifying every tiny anomaly. I was alone here, so profoundly alone. My thoughts, unchecked, could easily conjure these things. It was a consequence of my isolation, a byproduct of the echoing emptiness. I tried to focus on the tasks at hand, on making the house habitable, on pushing back against the encroaching dust and decay. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen trying to fix a leaky faucet. The rhythmic drip, drip, drip was the only sound for a long time, a distinct click, like a latch disengaging. I froze, wrench still in my hand, water dripping onto the warped floorboards. My eyes darted to the door. It was closed. I was sure of it. I'd closed it myself when I came in, but the sound. It had been undeniable. My heart began to beat a quick, erratic rhythm against my ribs. Had the latch simply failed, finally succumbed to age and rust? Or was something else happening in the house when I wasn't looking? The pie chart, a glowing green against the projector's blue light, seemed to mark my newfound inheritance, a visual representation of the percentage of my life that had just irrevocably shifted. I stood there, hands shoved deep into my pockets, feeling the residual chill of the air conditioning, or so I told myself. I turned, slowly, scanning the pristine, unoccupied chairs, the polished table, the blank white walls. Nothing. The projector fan whirred steadily, a low, mechanical drone that usually faded into background noise but now seemed amplified, an intrusive buzz in the sudden quiet. My skin prickled. It wasn't fear, not yet. More like a profound unease, a sense of having walked into a room only to find something was already there, something unseen. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the feeling. It was the stress, the unexpected news, the sheer enormity of it all. My mind was playing tricks. Gathering my backpack, I slung it over my shoulder, the weight of the laptop inside a familiar comfort. I had to get out of this room. As I reached the door, I paused, convinced I heard a faint scraping sound from the far corner, near the wall where the screen was projected. A soft SHHHK, SHHHK. Like dry leaves skittering across pavement, or something dragging a fingernail over rough plaster. I strained my ears. Only the projector's hum. My breath hitched, a shallow, quick intake. Was I truly hearing things, or was the old house already reaching for me, even from a distance? Back in my cramped motel room, the stale scent of disinfectant and cheap air freshener did little to dispel the lingering unease. I pulled out my laptop, the screen a sudden bright beacon in the dim room. The first thing I typed into the search bar was the address of the house. The solicitor had provided a basic printout, but it was sparse, bureaucratic. I needed more. I needed history, local news archives, property records, old community forums. I scrolled through pages, my fingers flying across the trackpad. There were no grand historical accounts, no architectural marvels, just scattered mentions. A brief article from the 1950s about a previous owner, a reclusive man who had simply vanished. No trace. The police investigation yielded nothing. Another snippet from the 70s, about a family who moved in only to leave abruptly after less than a year, selling the property for a pittance. The cheap landscape print above the bed, the worn carpet, the flickering fluorescent light in the bathroom. It all felt so mundane, so safe, yet the descriptions on the screen seemed to leach into the air around me. It wasn't the general coolness of the room. It was a distinct, concentrated patch of frigid air that raised goosebumps on my arms. I shivered, pulling my hoodie tighter. Then, a faint sound, clear as day, came from the bathroom. A low, guttural murmur like someone clearing their throat, but drawn out, stretched thin. My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze, every muscle tensed, listening. Just the hum of the motel's ancient mini-fridge. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the screen. There, an old forum post from a local history group dated nearly 20 years ago. A user, Old Man Willow, wrote, My grandmother used to tell stories about that place. Said it was built on a thin spot where the veil between worlds was weak. Said it needed people, fed on their sorrow. Always took the lonely ones, the ones already hurting. My gaze drifted to the heavy envelope the solicitor had given me, still sealed, resting on the bedside table. It felt suddenly significant, weighty. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. Inside, alongside the legal documents, were several brittle, yellowed photographs of the house, taken years ago. And beneath them, a small, leather-bound diary, its pages crumbling at the edges. No name on the cover, just a faded, embossed swirl. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was spidery, almost illegible in places. The entries were dated from the late 1800. Most were mundane accounts of weather and chores. They speak my name when no one is near. The cold follows me, a shadow of ice. I feel it watching, always watching. It wants what I have, what little peace remains. The house hungers. I cannot sleep. I cannot escape. Am I going mad, or is it truly here? My breath hitched again. Watching. Hungers. I looked up from the diary, my eyes sweeping the motel room. The silence was no longer empty, but filled with an unspoken presence. Was it truly here in this drab motel room, or was the house's influence already reaching into my mind, blurring the lines of what was real? My breath had hitched, just as the diary's words had intended it seemed. Whispers. Cold. Watching. The air itself felt thick, like wading through an invisible current. I'd spent the rest of that night staring at the ceiling, the diary clutched to my chest, every creak of the motel pipes sounding like a footfall, every distant car like a whisper at the window. The next morning, driven by a gnawing unease and a desperate need for answers, I packed the diary carefully and sought out the local public archives. I needed to understand what I had inherited. The archive was a quiet, almost forgotten annex of the town's library, accessible through a side door that groaned on rusted hinges. I found myself directed to an empty conference room, presentation still on screen, left over from some forgotten municipal meeting. The projector cast a faint, bluish glow onto a blank wall, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. A large oak table, scarred with generations of neglect, became my command center. I spread out the diary, my laptop, and the few documents I'd managed to salvage from the house deeds, old tax records, a faded photograph of a stern-faced man I assumed was an ancestor. The librarian, a quiet woman with spectacles perched on her nose, had provided me with access to digitized local newspapers and historical records. I started with the house's address, then the family name I'd seen on the deeds. It was a slow, painstaking process. The earliest mentions were benign, property transfers, births, deaths, the ordinary rhythm of life. But as I pushed further, scrolling through decades, the tone began to shift. The first hint of trouble appeared in a clipping from 1897. Prominent local figure succumbs to melancholy. The article, brief and formal, described the sudden decline of a previous owner, a gentleman farmer, who had become reclusive, prone to fits of despair, before being found unresponsive in his study. No mention of foul play, just a vague diagnosis of mental affliction. I felt a prickle on my skin. I kept digging. Another article a decade later spoke of a woman, the farmer's daughter, who had vanished without a trace from the estate. Search parties yield no clues. The language was understated, but the underlying horror was clear. She simply ceased to exist, swallowed by the land or perhaps the house. Disappearances. The diary's words echoed in my mind again, a low hum of warning. The pattern solidified. Every few decades, another strange occurrence. A young couple who inherited the house in the 1930s, both found dead in what was ruled a tragic accident, a gas leak, the official report stated. The local gossip column hinted at unusual circumstances, and a strange pall that had fallen over the property in the months prior. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the digital archives. I kept glancing at the blank presentation screen, half expecting something to materialize there. I shivered, not from the temperature, but from the insidious realization that was taking root. The house didn't just have a history. It was history, a living record of despair and tragedy. The accounts grew more recent, more unsettling. A man in the 1970s, a distant relative who briefly occupied the house, had been institutionalized after claiming the walls whispered to him that unseen hands touched him in the night. The language of the articles carefully avoided anything overtly supernatural, instead leaning heavily on terms like delusions, paranoid episodes, and nervous breakdown. But I knew, I felt it. It was all there, thinly veiled by polite society's explanations. I leaned back in the creaking chair, rubbing my temples. My head throbbed. The sheer volume of misfortune connected to that place was staggering. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern, a slow, methodical consumption of anyone who dared to live within its walls. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a hungry maw, and I, Seth, was the next offering. I pushed away from the table, the old oak groaning in protest. The air in the conference room felt heavy, pressing down on me. I gathered my things, the diary's weight in my bag feeling heavier than it should. I had found what I was looking for, but the answers only opened new chasms of fear. That night, back in the motel, exhausted but wired, sleep finally claimed me. But it brought no rest. I was back in the house, not as I knew it, but as a distorted memory. The wallpaper peeled in long, serpentine strips. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, each creak a low, guttural growl. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying and ancient, like dried blood and forgotten roses. I was in the master bedroom, the one I had tried to air out. Then a touch. I tried to scream, but my throat was tight, my voice stolen. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My dream had been so vivid, so real. Was it merely the stress of the day's discoveries, or had the house, or whatever resided within it, already found a way to reach me, even in my sleep? Whispers. Cold. Watching. I hadn't slept. Not truly. The motel room, meant to be a sanctuary, had become a waiting room. I knew I couldn't stay. The entity wasn't confined to the house. It was tied to me. Determination, a fragile thing, had hardened in my chest. I needed answers, not just from the diary, but from the world outside that decaying place. I needed to understand what I was fighting. The next morning, or what felt like morning after a sleepless night, I drove. Not back to the house, not yet. I drove to the nearest town, a small cluster of businesses struggling against the encroaching woods. I parked my car, the engine ticking, and walked the quiet streets. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I needed to search. My gaze drifted over the dusty storefronts, the peeling paint, the sense of forgotten lives clinging to everything. I needed a lead, a direction, something. Then I saw it. A municipal building, brick and glass, looking oddly out of place amidst the older structures. A sign, barely legible, mentioned historical archives. A long shot, I knew, but desperation was a potent guide. The main hall was quiet, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. I found an unattended door, slightly ajar, leading into what appeared to be an administrative section. My footsteps echoed on the linoleum. No one was there. I pushed open another door and stepped into an empty conference room, presentation still on screen. The room was stark, fluorescent lights buzzing with a low hum. A long table dominated the space, chairs neatly tucked in. On the projector screen, a slideshow of local infrastructure projects glowed, frozen on an image of a dilapidated bridge. It was eerily still, a pocket of forgotten time. I walked to the head of the table, my fingers tracing the cool, smooth surface. My eyes scanned the screen, the bridge, the technical diagrams. Nothing, just civic planning. But then, a flicker. The image on the screen wavered, a subtle distortion like heat haze rising from asphalt. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Fatigue, I told myself. The screen settled back into its mundane display of the bridge. I leaned closer, a prickle of unease starting to spread across my shoulders. Then it happened again. The bridge on the screen seemed to sag, the lines of its structure blurring. It wasn't part of the original image, I was sure. My breath hitched. My pulse hammered against my ribs. This wasn't fatigue, this was it. The presentation slid forward, not by my hand, but on its own. The image of the bridge vanished, replaced by a photograph. It was a faded, sepia-toned picture of a young couple, smiling, my parents, but they weren't smiling now. Their faces on the screen began to warp, their eyes widening into black pits, their mouths stretching into silent screams. My hands clenched into fists. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a dull ache that threatened to split my skull. The next slide clicked into place, a close-up of my childhood home. But it wasn't my home. It was the ancestral house, decaying and malevolent, superimposed onto the familiar brick. And in the window, a figure, vague, indistinct, but it was there, just as the diary had said. Then the text appeared, overlaid onto the image, not in the crisp font of the presentation, but in a jagged, hand-scrawled script that looked eerily familiar to the diary's handwriting. "You left them." A gasp tore from my throat. My legs felt weak. The words burned into my vision. It was speaking to my deepest, most agonizing guilt. My failure to protect, my inability to prevent their loss. "You are alone. You will always be alone." The screen flickered and the image shifted again. From its depths, faces emerged, fleeting, indistinct, but I recognized them. My sister. Their expressions were not of love or comfort, but of accusation. Their mouths moved, silently screaming my name. "Stop it!" I cried, my voice cracking. I lunged for the projector, my fingers fumbling for the power button. The hum of the projector ceased. I stood there, gasping, my chest heaving. I stared at the blank screen, then slowly, hesitantly, looked around the empty conference room. The chairs were still neatly tucked, save for the one I'd knocked over. The table was smooth and unmarked. The air, though still cool, felt less overtly hostile. Had it been real? Had I truly seen those images, those words? A low hum began again, not from the projector, but from the walls themselves, a vibration that resonated deep within my bones. Was it marking me, or was it just beginning? The word accusation died on my tongue, choked by the sheer, cold horror of it. My sister. Her face, not a comforting memory, but a distorted, spectral echo within that roiling darkness, her eyes burning with an unspoken judgment. I stumbled back, my chair scraping harshly on the polished floor of the empty conference room, presentation still on screen. The image of the ink-black clouds churning over the ancestral house, the fleeting faces, burned into my retinas even as the screen flickered, then went blank. Just the corporate logo now, stark white against a blue field. My breath hitched, ragged and shallow. The air in the room, already stale, suddenly felt thin, as if something vast and unseen had drawn all the oxygen out of it. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to purge the image of her face, twisted by something I couldn't comprehend. When I opened them, the blue screen was still there, but the room itself had changed. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, not precisely. It was a resonance, deep inside my skull, vibrating against the delicate membranes of my inner ear, yet bypassing them entirely. 1,000 voices, indistinct and overlapping, yet coalescing into a single, intimate plea. "You don't have to be alone, Seth." The words felt like they were woven from my own deepest despair, perfectly tailored to the gaping wound in my soul. "We understand your grief. We see your pain." A warmth, cloying and sweet, began to spread through me, starting from my fingertips and moving inward. It was not the warmth of comfort, but something insidious, like a slow-acting poison. A vision blossomed in my mind, vivid and intoxicating. My sister stood before me, not as the accusing spectre, but as he had been, vibrant, alive, her eyes sparkling with laughter. Her hair, the color of burnished copper, caught an imaginary light. She reached out a hand to me, her fingers long and slender, just as I remembered. Her smile was wide, full of the uncomplicated joy I thought I'd lost forever. "Always. Just let us in. Let us heal the emptiness." The temptation was a physical pull, an almost unbearable ache to surrender, to sink into that offered solace. My body swayed, my hand lifting, wanting to meet hers, to grasp that phantom comfort and never let go. The image of her, so real, so loving, was a balm to the raw edges of my grief. To have her back, even like this, a part of me screamed for it. To never feel this crushing loneliness again. But even as the longing threatened to consume me, a tiny, defiant spark ignited deep within. This was wrong. This was a lie. My sister was gone. This thing, whatever it was a mimic, a parasite, feeding on my sorrow, twisting my memories. It offered peace, but it felt like a trap carefully laid. I forced my arm down, clenching my fist until my nails dug into my palm. The sharp, physical pain helped ground me, pulling me back from the precipice of surrender. I had to fight it. I needed to talk to someone, anyone. My thumb flew across the screen, finding the contact for a colleague, an older man, pragmatic and grounded, his common sense a fortress against the bizarre. His name glowed on the screen, a beacon of blessed normalcy. I pressed call, the sound of the connection clicking through the receiver a desperate prayer. The line rang once, twice, an eternity. Then a click and the faint rustle of paper on the other end. "Seth, what's going on? You sound strange." His voice was flat, distant, like it was coming from the bottom of a well, muffled and indistinct. I need to tell you something," I stammered, my throat suddenly dry, a rough knot forming in it. "It's about the house, it's not right." I poured out everything, desperate for him to understand, for someone to believe. But as I spoke, his responses grew shorter, more clipped. "Seth, are I feeling all right? This isn't like I." His tone wasn't concern, not truly. "It sounds like you're under a lot of stress." He didn't believe me. He didn't even try to understand. I saw a sudden sharp crackle on the line, like static electricity sparking in the air around me. It wasn't just in the phone. I felt it on my skin, a prickling sensation, a faint metallic tang on my tongue. The line was still open, I could feel it, but no sound came through. "Hello, are I there?" I called out, my voice thin, almost swallowed by the sudden vacuum of sound. Nothing, not even a dial tone. The screen still displayed the benign corporate logo, marking me with its normalcy, its unwavering blue. It wasn't just that the call dropped. It was the way he'd spoken. The phone was heavy in my hand. The silence from the other end, a physical weight pressing against my ear. It wasn't the soft hiss of a dead line, but a profound, unnatural quiet, as if the sound itself had been swallowed. The metallic tang still lingered on my tongue, a bitter aftertaste, and the prickling sensation on my skin hadn't faded. It felt like standing too close to an old television, the kind that hummed with a low, static charge. I pulled the phone from my ear, staring at the black screen. No call ended notification. The call was still active somehow, but there was nothing. Just that oppressive silence. I tried calling the architect back, then the estate lawyer. Nothing. The phone wouldn't even dial out. It just sat there inert, a dead weight. A knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just a bad connection. This felt deliberate. I was in the office building, having come in for a meeting with a colleague that had been postponed. I needed to clear my head, to get away from the memory of that strange, electrical shock. I found myself drifting towards an empty conference room, presentations still on screen. The door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. I pushed it open further, stepping inside. The room was cool, a sterile calm that I hoped would settle my nerves. A projector hummed softly from the ceiling, casting a bright rectangular glow onto the screen at the far end. It was a standard business presentation, bullet points, graphs, a company logo in the corner. Mundane, safe. I walked to the long, polished table, tracing the edge with my finger. My reflection stared back, pale and drawn. I hadn't been sleeping well since I moved into the house. The loneliness, the gnawing grief, they were constant companions now, made worse by the unsettling feeling that I was never truly alone within those decaying walls. I tried to push the thought away. It was just stress, just my mind playing tricks. The hum of the projector seemed to intensify, a low thrumming that resonated in my chest. I glanced at the screen. The bullet points were still there, crisp and legible. A brief, almost imperceptible ripple across the image, like heat rising from asphalt. I blinked. Just the stable corporate graphics. I rubbed my temples. I was clearly more exhausted than I thought. A faint scent reached me then, something metallic and damp like old pennies and wet soil. It was subtle but distinct. I sniffed the air, turning my head slowly. The conference room was sealed, no open windows. Where was it coming from? The air conditioning. No, this was different, heavier. It clung to the back of my throat, a taste almost as unsettling as the one from the phone call. I took a step back, my gaze fixed on the screen. The presentation slide shifted, a new one appearing. This one was different. It wasn't a graph. It was a photograph, a blurry, sepia-toned image of the house. My house, the one I'd inherited. My breath hitched. How could that be? This was a corporate presentation. I walked closer, my heart beginning to thump a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Another flicker. The image distorted. Then the walls themselves began to peel and crack, not in the image, but on the screen, like the projector was projecting decay onto the very fabric of the image. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A prank. Someone had swapped the presentation, but who, and how would they have gotten that picture? I hadn't shared it with anyone here. No, this was wrong. This was impossible. The temperature plummeted. The metallic, earthy smell intensified, growing thick and cloying, pressing in on me. I wanted to run, to scream, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The image on the screen dissolved, replaced by a new one. It was a close-up, a single gnarled branch from an ancient tree, twisted and skeletal. It was unmistakably from the grounds of the house, a tree I'd seen just yesterday. And within the patterns of the bark, I saw faces. My mother's face, my father's. My hands flew to my mouth, stifling a cry. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My parents were gone. This was a trick of light, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and grief. The faces on the screen swelled, growing larger, closer, their silent screams becoming a tangible pressure in the air. The projector's hum now sounded like a low, guttural growl. The air was thick, heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. My vision blurred at the edges. The edges of the room seemed to waver, the walls themselves appearing to breathe, to expand and contract with a slow, agonizing rhythm. Then the table, the long, polished conference table. It shuddered. Not a tremor, but a deep, resonant vibration that I felt through the soles of my shoes, up my legs, into my very bones. The glass of water left by a previous occupant on the table rippled violently, then lifted, suspended in the air for a terrifying moment, before shattering against the far wall. Shards exploded, glittering in the projector's beams, scattering across the carpet. I stumbled back, tripping over an unseen obstacle, landing hard on my hands and knees. My mind, usually so resistant to the impossible, could no longer deny it. This was real. This was happening. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking uncontrollably. I lunged for the door, my fingers fumbling for the handle. I twisted it, but it wouldn't turn. It was locked, trapped. I pulled, I pushed, I hammered on the wood, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The faces on the screen were now a swirling vortex of anguish, surrounding a single, central image, a pair of empty, staring eyes that were somehow familiar, somehow mine. The growling intensified, vibrating through the floor, through the walls, through my very skull. The metallic, damp smell was overpowering now, filling my lungs with each desperate breath. It wasn't just in the house anymore. It was here, with me, and it was smiling. How could I escape something that had followed me out of the house, something that could twist reality itself to mark my deepest fears? The metallic tang clawed at the back of my throat, a bitter reminder of the deadline, of the profound, unnatural quiet that had swallowed the last whisper of sound. My hand still tingled from the receiver, phantom vibrations unsettling my palm. It wasn't just a phone call that had ended. It felt like a door had slammed shut, or perhaps opened into a deeper, colder space. I wouldn't run, not anymore. I needed answers, a weapon against this insidious presence. I remembered the older wing, seldom used, filled with forgotten things. There was a room there, a strange anachronism, that the real estate agent had called a study, but felt more like a forgotten office space, crammed with outdated technology and dusty files. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I moved through the silent corridors. My breath hitched in my chest, a shallow, ragged sound in the suffocating quiet. I pushed open a heavy oak door, revealing the empty conference room, presentation still on screen. A low, persistent hum filled the space, emanating from an old projector that cast a ghostly rectangle of light onto a pull-down screen. The room was sparse. A long, polished table scarred with age, several heavy chairs pushed haphazardly against the walls, and a single, ancient computer tower blinking a lonely green light on a side desk. The screen glowed with what looked like a faded photograph of the house, taken from an unusual angle, distorted by the projector's age. It showed the house bathed in an eerie twilight, the windows like vacant eyes. My eyes scanned the screen, my heart thrumming against my ribs. It wasn't just a photograph. Beneath it, a line of text, barely legible, flickered. I edged closer, my fingers brushing the cool surface of the table. The image shifted, A new slide appearing, this one a scanned page of what looked like handwritten script, spidery and hurried. The date at the top, though blurred, seemed to precede the house's construction by decades. My fingers, trembling slightly, found the dusty keyboard. I pressed a key, and the presentation lurched forward. More scanned pages filled the screen. It was a journal, or a collection of notes, penned by someone with a meticulous, if increasingly frantic hand. The writer, identified only as the keeper, detailed a presence, an ancient hunger that predated the very concept of the house. It was drawn to specific frequencies of human suffering, profound grief, utter loneliness, and the crushing weight of aimlessness. It didn't possess, the keeper wrote. It consumed. The words on the screen blurred, then sharpened. My eyes darted across the digital pages. It was a parasite, feeding not on blood or flesh, but on consciousness, on identity. The metallic tang in my mouth intensified, a sharp, coppery taste. It does not kill, one entry declared, underlined multiple times. It replaces. It becomes them, and they become. Nothing, a conduit. My breath caught in my throat. I remembered the strange emptiness in the eyes of the previous owner, the unnerving stillness of the detective's step. Was that what I had seen? Not a ghost, but an imitation. The keeper's entries grew increasingly desperate. He spoke of the collective, a horrifying implication that the consumed identities weren't simply annihilated, but absorbed, their despair fueling the entity's endless existence. The final entries were almost illegible, scrawled with a frantic urgency, detailing the keeper's attempts to contain or starve the entity. He spoke of the house as a cage, a structure built not to shelter, but to trap the thing beneath. A new slide appeared, a crude diagram. It showed the house, with lines radiating outwards from a central point deep below the foundations, like roots. And at the end of each line, a tiny, indistinct figure. These were not abstract drawings. These were the victims, the previous inhabitants, all connected, all feeding. A figure that looked disturbingly like me. My vision swam. The room felt suddenly too small, too airless. The low hum of the projector seemed to vibrate in my bones. I was not just living in a haunted house. I was living in a trap, a carefully constructed cage designed to draw in specific prey, and I was the latest. The screen flickered, and the last page of the journal appeared. A single, stark sentence, written in what looked like blood-red ink. It knows you are here. It has always known. My hands flew to my throat, a choked gasp escaping my lips. The metallic tang in my mouth was overwhelming now, a taste of iron and something else, something ancient and hungry. My own breath felt shallow, not entirely my own. There was I already, becoming. My hands flew to my throat, a choked gasp escaping my lips. There was I already, becoming. The thought clawed at me, cold and sharp. I leaned against the doorframe, the rough wood digging into my shoulder blade. My vision swam, the familiar hallway twisting into something liquid and indistinct. No, not yet. I wouldn't allow it. A spark, small but fierce, ignited within me. Determination. I had been a pawn, a grieving vessel, but I wasn't entirely broken. I knew its game now, or at least I thought I did. It fed on despair, on isolation. It twisted reality. What if I could starve it? What if I could break its hold on my perceptions? The house was its domain, its body, but I was still me. My plan was simple, reckless even. I would leave. Not just the house, but the town, the memory of it all. I would seek out people, warmth, noise. I would flood my senses with anything but the suffocating quiet of this place. If it craved loneliness, I would offer community. If it thrived on grief, I would find joy, however small. I had to believe it was possible. My legs felt heavy, as if wading through unseen currents, but I pushed forward. The front door was my target. Every step was a struggle against an invisible resistance. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, a low, mournful sound that seemed to vibrate through my bones. The air grew colder, biting at my exposed skin. It knew what I was planning. It was watching. I reached the foyer, the grand staircase looming like a skeletal spine in the gloom. The front door, a heavy slab of oak, seemed miles away. My breath hitched. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the house. The chandelier above me, usually still, swayed with a barely audible creak of metal. It wasn't the wind. This was the house, the entity, tightening its grip. It turned, surprisingly easily. Hope flared, a foolish, fragile thing. I pulled. The door opened a crack, revealing not the familiar overgrown garden path, but a sliver of polished linoleum floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. What was this? I pushed the door wider, stepping through the threshold. The air was sterile, cool, smelling faintly of stale coffee and printer toner. This wasn't outside. This wasn't even inside the house. I was standing in a narrow corridor, lined with generic framed prints of abstract art. The walls were painted a bland, institutional beige. Where was I? My gaze snapped to the room at the end of the corridor, bathed in the same flat, unforgiving light. The door stood open. I could see a long, polished table, surrounded by empty chairs. A large screen glowed at the far end of the room, displaying a corporate presentation. A title slide, bold and generic, read, Synergy Solutions, a path forward. I walked, or rather drifted, into the room. It was an empty conference room, presentation still on screen. The chairs were neat, perfectly aligned. A glass carafe of water sat on the table, alongside a stack of blank notepads and branded pens. Everything was pristine, untouched, waiting, but for whom? The entity hadn't just twisted my perceptions, it had moved me. Or worse, it had revealed its true scope. This wasn't a vision. This was real, tangible. I ran my hand over the cool, smooth surface of the table, solid, unyielding. My fingers traced the outline of a pen. It was real. A low hum filled the room, not from the fluorescent lights, but from somewhere deeper, a vibration that resonated in my chest. It was the same hum I'd felt in the house, but amplified, clearer. It pulsed, slow and deliberate, a heartbeat, my heartbeat. Then I saw it. Not with my eyes, not really, but in the shimmering distortion on the presentation screen. It wasn't a monster, not with claws or teeth. It was everywhere. It had always been everywhere. The house was just a conduit, a vessel. My isolation there had been a convenient lure, a perfect breeding ground, but the entity wasn't confined to its walls. It could manifest in the mundane, the sterile, the utterly unremarkable. It could reach me anywhere, anytime, as long as I was alone, as long as I carried the grief, the despair, the aimlessness. This wasn't an escape. This was another room in its infinitely expanding prison. The metallic taste flared again, stronger this time, coating my tongue. I was becoming. I was its next meal, its next anchor. The presentation slide shifted. Growth opportunities. It now read. And then, slowly, a single word began to form beneath it, composed of the same shimmering distortion that marked the entity's presence. Belong to it, to this. The walls seemed to press inward, the bland beige suddenly menacing. There was this its true face. There was it not just feeding, but growing. And what did it mean to truly belong to something like this? The sterile beige walls of the empty conference room, presentation still on screen, pressed in closer. The hum, no longer just a sound, vibrated through the floorboards, up my legs, into the very marrow of my bones. It was a low thrumming, like a colossal engine buried deep beneath the earth, and I was caught in its gears. Belong to it, to this. The words weren't spoken, not aloud, but they unfurled in my mind, an invasive banner snapping in a gale I couldn't feel. My fingers twitched, a desperate urge to grasp something, anything solid, but the air itself felt viscous, clinging to my skin. The overturned chair lay like a fallen sentinel, its clatter long absorbed by the oppressive quiet. On the screen, the presentation flickered. A bland pie chart, then a line graph, then suddenly, a picture of my mother, her smile wide and genuine from years ago. A memory I cherished, untainted. Then it warped. Her eyes elongated, her mouth stretched, a silent scream frozen in pixels. My breath hitched. This was its game, its cruel mockery. The air grew heavy, thick with a scent I couldn't place, something like damp soil mixed with old copper, and a faint, cloying sweetness. My scalp tightened, prickling with a cold dread that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The hum intensified, a low drone that bypassed my ears entirely, resonating instead behind my eyes, at the base of my skull. It felt like a current, surging through me, trying to find every weak point, every forgotten sorrow, every regret. The neutral tones of the conference room began to shift, the lines of the walls softening, melting, as if the very structure was dissolving around me. Was I seeing it, or was it happening inside my head? The presentation still on screen seemed to ripple, the image of my distorted mother replaced by a swirling vortex of indistinct shapes. Shapes that felt strangely familiar, like fragments of my own scattered thoughts, twisted into an inescapable maze. It wasn't just memories it was pulling now, it was the essence of those memories, the emotional residue. I felt a profound weariness settle over me, heavier than any grief I had known. It wanted me to surrender, to sink into the comfortable oblivion of its embrace. To belong. My knees felt weak, threatening to buckle, but I forced myself to stand straighter, my jaw clenched. This was the final push, I knew, the true feeding. The hum pulsed, a rhythmic throb that echoed the beat of my own frantic heart. My physical reactions became overwhelming. My skin crawled, not with insects, but with the sensation of something trying to unravel me from the inside out. My muscles spasmed, an involuntary jerk that sent a shiver down my spine. I could feel a pressure, not just on my chest, but within it, as if something was expanding, filling every cavity, leaving no room for my own self. My thoughts, usually a chaotic jumble, became eerily clear, then fractured, then clear again, like a radio tuning in and out of a distant station. It was trying to overwrite me, to become me. This wasn't just about taking my grief. It was about taking me, all of me. My identity, my consciousness, my very spark. I was becoming another thread in its vast, humming tapestry. Another whisper in the walls, another silent observer to its endless hunger. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless. This wasn't a fresh start. It was a permanent end, a conversion into something else entirely. I would be here, yes, but not as Seth. Never again as Seth. A sudden, jarring image flashed through my mind, overriding the swirling chaos on the screen. It wasn't a memory of loss, but of defiance. My father, standing tall against a blustering storm, his hand firm on my shoulder, teaching me to brace against the wind. "Don't let it knock you down, Seth," he'd said, his voice raspy from the gale. "Stand your ground." It was a simple moment, long forgotten. It resonated now with a fierce clarity. I wouldn't be knocked down, not like this. A surge of something unfamiliar, raw and unyielding, ignited within me. It wasn't strength in the physical sense, but a stubborn, burning refusal. I wouldn't become a part of its static, humming consciousness. I wouldn't surrender my name, my memories, myself, to this insidious thing. The entity pulsed harder, as if sensing my resistance, its hum rising to a piercing frequency that threatened to shatter my eardrums. My head pounded. My vision swam. The bland beige walls of the empty conference room, presentation still on screen, seemed to close in, ready to consume me whole. But I was still here. My name was Seth. I remembered my father's words. I remembered 1,000 small moments that made me me. The entity wanted me to belong. But what if I simply refused? What would happen then? It was a low thrumming, like a colossal engine buried deep beneath the earth, and I finally understood. This wasn't real, not truly. This was its final, desperate attempt to hold me, to keep me disoriented, adrift. It wanted me lost, confused, despairing. My breath hitched. The air grew thick, tasting of stale dust and something metallic, like old blood. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, a stuttering pulse against the oppressive drone. The projected slide on the screen, a graph I hadn't looked at in years, tracking declining market shares, seemed to ripple, the data lines twisting like black veins. "No," I whispered, the word thin, fragile. My voice cracked. But the resolve solidified. This was its trap. This was the lure of a familiar, mundane hell, designed to make me forget the real hell I was fighting. I closed my eyes, forcing the image of the beige walls away. I focused on the hum. It was deep, resonant, a vibration that promised oblivion. But it also had a rhythm, a heartbeat slow and ancient, the heartbeat of the house. My house, the one I inherited, the one it claimed. When I opened my eyes, the conference room was still there, but it was fading at the edges. The ceiling tiles were peeling, revealing damp-stained lath. The beige paint bubbled, then peeled away like old skin, showing the rough, grey stone beneath. The hum intensified, a roar now, tearing at my eardrums. The projector sparked, died, plunging the room into gloom, lit only by the faint, flickering glow of the screen, which now showed nothing but static, a storm of white noise. I pushed myself up from the conference chair, its wheels squealing on what was no longer carpet, but splintered floorboards. The scent of ozone vanished, replaced by the damp, earthy smell of decay and something else, something cloying and sweet like forgotten flowers. I stumbled forward, my hand reaching out, not for a door handle, but for the rough-hewn stone wall I knew was there. This was it, the door, or rather the way through. The hum became a guttural growl, rising from the very foundations of the ancestral home. I was back. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient wood. My boots crunched on scattered debris-plaster dust, splintered lath, broken glass. It was everywhere, seeping from the walls, dripping from the ceiling, pressing in from the unseen corners. But I was done being its victim. I focused on it, on the memories of what I'd lost, not to grieve, but to remember why I fought, my family, my life. The hum led me deeper, down a collapsing staircase I could barely see, the steps groaning under my weight. The entity was pulling me, drawing me into its core. I reached the bottom, my feet sinking into a layer of gritty, damp earth. I was in the cellar. The root cellar, I realized, the one I'd only glanced into once, filled with forgotten jars and cobwebs. Now it was transformed. The shelves were gone. The stone walls curved inward, forming a cavernous space. It was not a mound of earth. It pulsed with a low thrumming, a sickening, organic beat. The source, the heart of the parasite. It was larger than I could have imagined, a physical manifestation of the despair it fed on. It was formless, yet undeniably present, a raw, writhing knot of malice. "Just let go, Seth. Surrender." "No," I choked out, my voice raw. My legs felt like lead, my arms heavy. It was trying to paralyze me, to make me an easy meal. But I pushed through it. I forced one foot forward, then the other. "You feed on despair," I said, my voice gaining strength, echoing in the confined space. "You thrive on loneliness. You twist grief." The mass pulsed, a low growl emanating from it, vibrating through the stone. It was a sound of ancient, offended power. "But I'm not alone," I declared, a defiant surge of adrenaline coursing through me. I thought of my family, not with sorrow, but with the fierce love that still bound me to them. I choose to remember them, not to mourn endlessly, but to live for them. The tendrils on the walls seemed to writhe faster. "Your fault. You couldn't save them. You are alone." My head pounded, my stomach clenched. It was trying to break me, to fill me with the very emotions I was denying it. I saw flashes, a car on a rainy road, a closed casket, an empty chair, each image designed to tear at my resolve. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, gripping my fists until my nails dug into my palms. "Lies," I hissed. "All lies." I opened my eyes. It was not a spoken word, but a thought projected directly into my mind, laced with an ancient bitterness. A flicker. I am eternal. My vision blurred. This was the reckoning, a battle of wills. My determination against its ancient hunger. Could I truly starve something that had fed for centuries? Or would I just become another forgotten meal? My vision blurred. The air grew impassably cold, stealing the breath from my lungs. My body trembled, not just from fear, but from a profound chill that seemed to penetrate my bones. This was it. The end, the final dissolution. Then a flicker, a different kind of light. My eyes snapped open, or perhaps they merely refocused. My lungs, which had been burning moments before, now drew in air that smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaning solution. I was sitting in an office chair, the kind with worn fabric and a slight squeak when I shifted my weight. Before me, a long, polished table stretched across the room, reflecting the light in muted squares. Beyond it, against the far wall, a projector cast a blue-tinted image onto a large screen, a bar graph labeled Quarterly Projections, with bland corporate bullet points beneath it. An empty conference room, presentation still on screen. My head throbbed. I brought a hand up, fingers brushing against clammy skin. My hair felt plastered to my scalp. Had I been sweating? But this wasn't morning. There were no windows, only the hum of the projector and the soft whir of an unseen ventilation system. I pushed myself up, the chair scraping against the carpeted floor. My legs felt like jelly, threatening to give out. Every muscle ached, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that had nothing to do with sitting in a chair. How had I gotten here? What was here? I stumbled to the table, leaning heavily on its smooth surface. Was it over? Had I escaped? The thought was a fragile butterfly, fluttering in my chest, too delicate to truly believe. My gaze swept around the room, searching for an exit, a sign, anything that could explain this jarring transition. The walls were painted a neutral beige. A white board stood in one corner, covered in neat, erased smudges. A water cooler hummed softly near a closed door. Everything was utterly mundane, utterly normal, too normal. My eyes fixed on the presentation screen, quarterly projections, a meaningless phrase, a meaningless graph. But then a subtle shift. The projector bulb seemed to flicker just for a millisecond. The blue tint deepened, then softened, and the bullet points, they weren't changing, not really, but they seemed to ripple as if the words themselves were unstable, struggling to maintain their form. Loss. The word wasn't on the screen. I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking my head violently. No, not here, not now. I had fought it. I had resisted. I had felt the tear, the agonizing separation as I pulled free, hadn't I? When I opened my eyes, the bar graph was still there, unwavering. The bullet points were perfectly legible. I must have imagined it. My mind, still reeling from whatever ordeal I just endured, was playing tricks on me. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I gripped the table tighter, grip tight. I needed to leave. I needed air. I needed to confirm this was real, that I wasn't still trapped in some elaborate illusion. I moved towards the door, my steps slow, deliberate, each one an act of defiance against the phantom gravity that still seemed to want to drag me back. My hand reached for the cold metal handle. It turned with a satisfying click. The hallway outside was equally sterile, more fluorescent lights, beige walls, a line of identical closed doors. It stretched out, empty, silent. No sounds of distant traffic, no muffled voices from behind any of the doors. Just the soft, consistent hum of the building. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the unnatural quiet. I walked, choosing a direction at random. Each step felt like an act of faith, a test of reality. My reflection in a polished fire extinguisher box was pale, drawn, with eyes that looked too wide, too haunted. But it was my reflection. I was here. I was alive. A small sigh escaped my lips, shaky and weak. I had survived. The house, the entity, whatever it was, I had escaped its grasp. Then I saw it. On the wall, pinned to a bulletin board next to a faded notice about a company picnic, was a small, hand-drawn sketch. It was crudely done, just a few lines, but unmistakable. The gnarled branches of the ancient oak that stood sentinel over the house, its silhouette stark against a moonless sky. And beneath it, just barely visible, the suggestion of a sprawling, decaying structure. The house, my breath hitched. My fingers went numb. I stared at the drawing, a cheap piece of paper tacked to a mundane office wall, and the fabricated calm shattered around me. It wasn't possible. How could it be here? There was someone else involved. Had I been followed? The air in the hallway, which had felt cool and neutral, now seemed to grow heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. The hum of the building deepened, changing pitch, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in my teeth. I tore the drawing from the board. It was just a drawing, a coincidence, someone's idle doodle. My skin crawled. I looked around wildly, but the hallway was still empty. The doors remained shut. The hum of the building returned to its steady drone, the lights bright and holding steady. I knew it. It burrowed deep, a parasitic seed planted in my mind. The conference room, the hallway, the apparent escape, was it all just another, more elaborate trap? A final, cruel trick? Had I ever truly left the house at all, or was I simply in a different room of its endless, twisting architecture? And if I was still here, where did the walls end?